You may have noticed in the recent Hearthstone expansions that the power level has been extremely high. And this didn't happen by accident. Something happened in Hearthstone's history that kind of forced expansions to be this powerful. In the days of the Witchwood, we were introduced to two of the strongest cards we've ever seen in the history of Hearthstone. But not only were these cards extremely strong, they basically warped the format around them through the entire year of the Raven. The two legendaries I am talking about are Genn Greymane and Baku the Moon Eater. Genn Greymane was a 6-mana 6/5 legendary start of game. If your deck has only even cost cards, your starting hero power cost 1. And Baku the Moon Eater was a 9-mana 7/8 legendary start of game. If your deck has only odd cost cards, upgrade your hero power. And if you played during the year of the Raven, you know how strong both of these cards were because you basically saw them warp the meta no matter what expansion came out, no matter what the best deck was, because these two effects were insanely powerful. Now, it's kind of ironic because the current power level of expansions would probably be way too high for these cards to make as much of an impact, but these two cards set the stage for what expansions had to be like in order for them to actually be a good expansion. Before we get to that, we have to go and look at the Witchwood expansion, which in all honesty was a really bad expansion. A lot of the cards in this set did not really do anything. And to be fair, we had Journey to Ungoro, Knights of the Frozen Thrones, and Kobolds and Catacombs before this, but that doesn't really excuse the fact that the Witchwood expansion was a very weak set. Just by looking at the legendaries in this expansion, I could probably name about 4 that saw consistent play throughout their time in Standard. You could also say the same thing about the Boomsday Project and Rostakon's Rumble. All 3 of the sets in the Year of the Raven were not super powerful. And this wasn't by accident either. If you look at the previous expansion, Kobolds and Catacombs, you can see that most of the set was completely bonkers in terms of power level. This set was so good, it included cards like Master Oakheart, Skull of the Minari, Kingsbane, if you remember that. It also included arguably the best epic we've ever seen with Corridor Creeper, which terrorized the ladder for quite some time. So instead of doing another insane expansion, the Hearthstone team decided to take a bigger risk. Game designer Ixar, who is currently one of the leads in the Hearthstone team, gave us some insights on how these sets were designed from the Kobolds and Catacombs all the way up to Rostakon's Rumble. In one of Ixar's AMAs, Dog asked him what were some of the biggest failures when it came to game design in Hearthstone. Ixar responded with definitely had some pure design failures and was referring to Kobolds all the way up to Rostakons. You could pretty clearly see some of the failure. I was new, I wanted to push the boundaries of power and synergy and saw the results. Pulled back way too hard the following year. In other words, Ixar is basically alluding that because Kobolds was such a powerful set, they decided to pull back the power level for the rest of the expansions the following year, which adds another piece to the puzzle on why the Witchwood, the Boomsday Project, and Rostakon's Rumble were all pretty mediocre sets. But because they decided to lower the power level of the expansions, that means a more powerful card like Baku and Genn are going to stand up way higher against the rest of the field. Meaning, if you look at Genn and Baku and see how big of a problem they were in the Witchwood, that problem is emphasized even more because of how weak the rest of the set is in comparison.
I heard in an interview that Dean Ayala Ixar from the Balance team said that they have them sort of on their radar as something they need to address in some capacity prior to the first expansion of next year, or else they're afraid that they'll just sort of continue to run away with the metagame and really overshadow other cool stuff. And frankly, that's what they've been doing for a while already.
So not only did the Hearthstone team take a risk in lowering the power level of expansions that followed Kobolds, but they also took a really big risk in the sense that what happens if we make one thing that's really good in a year of bad cards? The result of that risk meant Baku and Genn were getting rotated into the Hall of Fame earlier than they were supposed to. Now, that still doesn't answer the question I presented at the start of this video. Why does Genn and Baku set up the power level for future expansion? Well, here is the thing. If you aim high for everything in an expansion and some things are a little bit too strong, it's much easier to bring cards down to match the power level of the rest of the expansion. And we saw this with the release of Demon Hunter, which was released in a ridiculous state of power compared to every other class in the game. And as we noticed that the team slowly started to nerf Demon Hunter day by day, week by week, and month by month until Demon Hunter was at a relative power level with the rest of the classes in the game. And we've been seeing this a lot with expansions. United and Stormwind is a perfect example, as that set was completely bonkers on release, but they slowly started nerfing things until the relative power level of every single class was about the same. Sure, the Warlock quest was extremely powerful with Flesh Giant, but you also had Battle Master and Conviction as a way to fight that, so at least there was multiple ways to combat the current metagame. But the Witchwood had a very particular problem that was almost impossible to fix without straight up Hall of Faming Baku and Genn. See, when you look at the cards of Baku and Genn, how do you actually nerf the power level of the cards without actually just changing the card entirely? Both of these cards were put into decks because of the effect that they provided at the start of the game, but you can't really change that without actually just completely changing the card text. Nerfing the mana cost doesn't matter because, again, these cards were put into decks because of the effect.
Unlike most cards, which, say you think that, a hero card, for instance, say you think that Dr. Boom is too powerful. It's like, well, we could change some of the numbers in Dr. Boom. We could make Dr. Boom cost 8, or Dr. Boom cost 9, or Dr. Boom cost 10. You could make, him give less armor. You could change, some of the numbers on the various hero powers that he gives you. You can't really do much to get in Baku, because you could make each of them 10 cost 0/0s, and a huge percentage of the game, it wouldn't matter, because what's powerful about the card, it has nothing to do with the actual numbers in the card. It just has to do with the fact that it upgrades your hero power by virtue of simply being in your deck.
So when you look at the Witchwood set and you see a bunch of 5 out of 10 cards, and both Genn and Baku are 10 out of 10 cards, not only does this issue stand out a whole lot more, but you couldn't really remedy the situation. Where imagine if Genn and Baku were both released in a future set like United and Stormwind or Fractured and Alterac Valley. Sure, they would probably still be pretty good cards, but they wouldn't be meta dominant anymore. And that's because if you released a card like Baku or Genn into a newer expansion, they are still 10 out of 10 cards, but they're being released in other 10 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 cards, where their problems do not seem as large in comparison to every other thing that's been released during that set. And that is why all these new expansions are released with ridiculous power levels. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would appreciate a subscription. Check out Ridiculous Hat. He helped me make this video. You look fantastic.